Welcome to the Happier and Healthier podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marlowe, and this is a place where we don't rely on good luck or good genes for our health and happiness, but rather we create it with our thoughts and our actions each and every single day. Each week, I'll bring you a thought or a guest that will help you live your happiest and healthiest life. Are you ready? Welcome back to the Happier and Healthier podcast. The podcast has been on hiatus the past couple of weeks, so I am happy to be back and to be bringing you this excellent interview. Dr. Emilia Javorsky, MD and PH, is a physician scientist focused on protecting your skin from the sun. She is the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Sun, a daily gummy for sun protection. Emilia received her undergraduate degree from Columbia University, her master's from Boston University, her medical degree from the University of Massachusetts, and she completed her postdoctoral research in dermatology at Harvard Medical School. She's also a former Fulbright Schumann Scholar, a TEDx speaker, a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30, and is part of the World Economic Forum's Global Shaper community. Emilia, you have been a busy woman the past few years.
Yes, I have, but all really fun things. So been really privileged to do it.
Yes. I'm so excited to dig into your research and what you're working on now. So I know your biggest thing now is all about sun protection, and that's what you're doing with Sun. So were you always interested in protecting your skin from the sun, or how did what prompted you to get interested in this?
Yeah, so actually, I was not someone who used to think about sun protection much at all before I got involved in dermatology research. So growing up, I was someone who kind of had a little bit of an olive skin tone. I didn't really burn. I would tan in the summer. Never really thought that sun protection was something that I had to be worried about. I also didn't really have any skin cancer in the family. So for me, sun protection just wasn't anywhere on my priority list. And it was really when I started working in dermatology that I came to appreciate just how important sun protection is. And that sun protection isn't just if you're very fair-skinned and burn easily, but it's really something that everyone should be making as part of their daily routines. What made me kind of realize this was one particular project I was working on in dermatology involved this device that we call a Visia device. So it's basically takes ultraviolet photographs of your skin. So it enables you to visualize the sun damage. And so basically what you see in these pictures is all of the sun damage that's in your skin. And so for this particular trial that I was working on, they said, Emilia, can you help us calibrate the device? Get in there, we'll take some pictures to make sure it works. And I was so shocked to see that already in my early 20s, I had evidence of sun damage in my skin looking at these pictures. And it really kind of hit home for me, like looking at the damage in my skin, just how important sun protection is. And that's what kind of first sparked my interest in it, was really a personal problem. And then throughout medical school and my time in dermatology, really learning just from a medical perspective about how important sun protection is for skin health. So a lot of people know the association between sun and skin cancer, but sun really affects all aspects of skin health. So actually almost 90% of preventable aging is due to sun exposure. So the best thing you can do for your skin from an aging perspective is protect yourself against the sun, but not just aging and skin cancer, but across the board, all kinds of markers of skin health, how hydrated it is, how well you're able to fight off infection, all come down to helping to protect yourself against the sun in the long haul. So it was both kind of that personal moment of seeing that picture of my own sun damage, and then really learning about it from the medical perspective during med school and through my research that really galvanized me to say sun protection is a really important problem.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like in the wellness community, there's really two camps. there's the people, and this is very big in LA now, where people are literally wearing these huge visors to cover their face from the sun, and they're, slathered in sunscreen and protective clothing, and like they will not let sun like touch their skin. And then there is the other side that are like, hey, the sun is natural. We need our vitamin D, a healthy tan is a healthy glow. So is there any, can we be in the sun without protection at all? Or do you think that we always need some sort of protection?
So I'm of the camp that you always really do need some protection on board if you want to be protecting yourself against damage. Because one thing I think that's often kind of confusing in the sun protection world is people feel like, oh, if I'm not burning, then I'm not getting skin damage. And they say, well, if I'm spending some time in the sun, or I have a little bit of a tan, or I get a darker tan, then that means I'm okay. But it's really sort of, yes, a burn is very severe damage, but your skin is getting damaged in all those other moments as well. So it is really, when you think about it over the course of your life, how much sun does your skin see? It's not just those days at the beach or when you're out for a hike or you're outside all day that you get the sun. It's those smaller moments. It's driving in your car. It's walking your dog. It's, walking with friends outside. And I think that's something people don't appreciate, is kind of those little everyday moments, but they really do add up over the course of a lifetime in terms of your sun exposure risk. Now, that being said, I also know that people have lives and people are busy, and it's really hard to remember to, put sunscreen on and a hat and use all different kind of sun protection tools. Sun dots is another one, which we'll talk about later. So I'm of the camp that if your goal is protecting yourself against all skin damage from the sun, that you should always have protection on board. Yet I am also practical and realize that life is busy and people don't always have time to think about that. So a little bit of sun is probably going to be, okay for you, but you definitely still are getting some damage on board. It's just probably less severe than if you're baking outside all day.
Yeah, well, let's actually talk the different types of protection, because I know, most people, they know they could put sunscreen on, they know they could wear long sleeves and protective clothing. But what I think people don't realize is that you can actually protect your skin to some extent by what you're consuming, right? Totally. So there have been many studies. I think probably the studies on lycopene, which is found in tomatoes and watermelon, that's probably the most well-known, that, it got a lot of media attention, that people who consume large amounts of lycopene, they have a higher tolerance to the UV rays. So your product, Sun Dots, has an extract from a fern, which has also been found to help protect yourself from the sun. So can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I think what you talk about in terms of traditional sun protection, like the sunscreen and clothing and hats, is really taking the perspective of preventing sunlight from getting to your skin in the first place. So making sure that those harmful, damaging UV rays don't get there. This other perspective, which is looking at ingestible approaches to sunscreen, is how do you really power up your skin's kind of natural defense mechanisms to deal with sunlight that does get in. And so 2 examples you cite of lycopene and also the watermelon. There's been other studies with other carotenoids, green tea extract, that are out there that show, when you ingest some of these things, it helps to kind of power up your skin's defenses, mainly what we call sort of their antioxidants. So one way that sun damages your skin is it does something called generate free radical damage, or also known as oxidative damage. And it's these kinds of compounds in the family of antioxidants that can really help deal with some of that damage and really strengthen your skin's ability to basically naturally combat the damage that would happen from the sun. The extract that's actually in Sun Dots is really exciting to us from a science point of view, because some of these other ingredients that, we've mentioned, they have maybe a couple of studies that have been done on them, or they're studies that have been done in mice or studies that have been done in petri dishes. What really excites us about the fern extract that's in Sun Dots, called Polypodium leucotomus, is that this is actually formed on a body of research that goes over the course of 30 years. And it's been studied in over 12 clinical trials up until this point, published in really high quality journals like the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology that really demonstrate this sun protection benefit with both UVA and UVB, which are two different types of UV light. And kind of in addition to all the research that's happened from the academic side, it's also an extract that's been used widely in Central and South America, but also in Europe for the past 30 years for this particular purpose. So for me, coming from the science side of things, just seeing how strong the body of research was, and then also this long use history got me really excited about it as a potential new tool in the sun protection toolkit. And coming from the dermatology world, I was like, this is a really kind of new and different way to approach sun protection. And I started asking around with all my dermatology colleagues and was really surprised to find out that many of them actually used polypodium as part of their sun protection regimens. So many of them have all of the tools on board. They wear sunscreen, they wear a hat, and they take this fern extract. And so for me, that was just further validation that the science is really strong. This is something that people use, and it's a great new tool for your sun protection toolkit.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And everyone who listens to this podcast knows my whole philosophy is food is medicine, and food affects everything. And, you mentioned earlier the sun causing aging. And I think that is always, for example, sugar also can cause aging of the skin, right? Premature aging. And it's so funny because when I talk about sugar, I'll be like, it can lead to weight gain. It can lead to diabetes and heart disease and all this chronic illness and disease. And it's like, okay, yeah. But then it's like, okay, it could also lead to premature aging of the skin. And then all of a sudden you want to give up sugar, right?
What? No, that's terrible, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm so glad that we're starting to really have more research and it's starting to become more common knowledge that what we're consuming does have such an impact on our skin and how it appears and how it can react to the sun. So I find it really fascinating, and I'm so glad to hear about this fern extract that has that ability to help protect our skin.
Totally. And I think that's something that often does get lost is, healthcare is a byproduct of your whole lifestyle. And I think very often coming from someone that comes from kind of the very traditional medical world where a lot of what we prescribe are medications. There's there's both not enough research and there's both not enough attention to how everything we do in our daily lives and everything that we put in our bodies affects our health, affects our skin, affects our appearance, affects our well-being. Because when you think about it, most of what you're putting in your body aren't medications, they're foods. And so really thinking and understanding and devoting more time and energy and research dollars to figuring out how do these things that we put in our body affect our health, I think is something that's really important and hopefully we'll start to see more of.
Yeah, for sure. And even just anecdotally, I remember growing up and I would wear sunscreen religiously. My mother slathered it on all of us.
Good.
Like crazy. But we had a very standard American junk food diet. I didn't eat any vegetables. Everything came out of a box. And I used to get blistering sunburns. Even I remember this one day in particular, we had went to the beach. And it wasn't like we were at the beach 7 days a week. We live in New York, so it was really only the summer months that we were getting tons of sun. But I remember this one day at the beach and I was reapplying the sunscreen every few hours and putting the t-shirt on for most of the time and, only having it off for a little bit of time. And anyway, I got the worst sunburn on my back to the point that it blistered. And I'm just thinking how is this possible? And so a lot of times people will still get sunburn with sunscreen. And they say sometimes that it's right because they don't reapply it or maybe they're spending more time in the sun because they have this false sense of protection. But then I'm curious what your thoughts were on this. I know a couple years ago, there was this whole big thing on retinol palmate, I believe, some vitamin A derivative that was used in sunscreens that was it caused sunburn when it was exposed to the sun. And it was an ingredient in, I think, 30% of the sunscreens on the market, right? Yeah, so I feel like we need other forms of protection. We need to really be making sure that we're focusing on what we're eating and what we're ingesting in terms of sun protection, because I can say now that I'm older, of course, I'm definitely more cognizant of the sun and protecting my skin, but I don't burn anymore. I've never had a burn like that again. Now that I eat all my dark leafy greens and my rainbow of vegetables and all of that, my skin definitely is more tolerant to the sun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A couple points on that I think are really interesting. So, what we eat and how it can protect our body against sun damage is like a really, really interesting area of research, and something that's somewhat related that I came across recently that just emphasizes how much people are starting to think about how what we can eat can protect our body against damage from things like UV radiation or any kind of ionizing radiation. Is there's even research when thinking about launching people into space and going into deep space travel. How can we sort of use antioxidant-rich diets to help people basically fight off the effects of radiation? So it's something that people are thinking of, both, on the wellness side, but also on the really, really sort of rigid science, basic science, even to the point of space travel side. So I think it's something that's really starting to gain both appreciation for just understanding the effects from a scientific perspective and understanding what's actually happening to the body, that these certain foods and things that we ingest can protect us, but also a much sort of broader acceptance that these kinds of things that we eat should be in the toolkit along with traditional medications and traditional kind of drug-based approaches. What you said was really interesting about the vitamin A derivatives. So that's something that can make you very sun sensitive. And actually, the vitamin A family is something called retinoids or retinol, which you'll see very often in a lot of the anti-aging creams that people will use because they're pretty potent for helping to sort of remodel and renew the skin. But they do make you super sun sensitive. And so you'll see people trying to combat the effects of aging through putting these sort of vitamin A based products on their skin and then end up with sunburns or increased sun damage because they don't realize at the same time, well, it might be helping to correct some old sun damage. Now you're generating new sun damage by making yourself so sensitive. So really what we put on our skin is so important, and understanding like what are actually in these sunscreens that we're putting on our skin, because, speaking from our perspective at Sundots, we're very, very strong advocates of mineral-based sunscreens as opposed to what we call the quote-unquote chemical-based sunscreens. That's something that's important to us from both a health perspective and then also an environmental perspective, because the things that may pose a risk to our health have also been shown to pose risks to the health of the environment. Especially, one great example is there's a specific ingredient in sunscreens called oxybenzone, and very recently, Hawaii actually passed a ban banning the use of sunscreens containing that particular ingredient because they actually are very detrimental to the coral reefs that are offshore. And so you think like, this is something I put on my skin and yet it's killing marine life. Like that can't be good. So that's why we also are very strong advocates of clean mineral-based sunscreens to put on your skin. It does give you a little bit of a white look. That's one reason a lot of people don't like the mineral sunscreens, but it is the absolute best thing that you can do for your skin health from a sun protection and what do we put on our skin perspective.
Do you have a favorite mineral sunscreen in particular?
Yeah, we have a lot listed on our website. One that I really like are the All Good products. They're really fantastic products, also mineral sunscreens. And they do have a great spray formulation that I really like. And I haven't seen too many spray formulations of the mineral sunscreens, and it gives you a nice, even application. And you can also do things like get your back, which is really hard to do with sunscreen if you don't have a spray product. So.
For sure, or a friend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And now what about if our makeup has a SPF 15 or 30? Is that enough, or should we be putting on a layer below that?
Yeah, so I'm a very strong advocate that you should be putting on a layer below that. I think a lot of people get kind of a false sense of security in seeing that SPF on the bottle with makeup. They're like, oh, it has SPF in it. That means I don't have to wear SPF. But in order to get the SPF listed on the bottle, you'd have to put on such a thick layer of makeup that it would look completely unnatural, right? Just the way that we apply makeup isn't the way that you apply for sort of the sun protection testing. So when they test out the SPF of these different makeups, it's put in this really, really thick layer that's far beyond what you would ever apply when you're sort of naturally applying makeup to your skin. So that's why I say it's really, really important to also have additional protection on board and not to feel like, oh, I have it in my makeup and that's enough.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit? I know there's a lot of sort of confusion around the SPF numbers. You know, you have SPF 15, 30, 50, 100. So can you kind of tell us what the difference is and what we should be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So with SPF, it's really talking about, great way to, I like to think about it is how much light is the sun blocking out, right? If you put that layer on your skin to get the SPF from the bottle, how much light is it blocking out? And so this is really why when you hear people make the argument kind of against really high SPFs, like, 70, 100, 100 plus, well, you're already blocking out most light by SPF 30 and almost all of the light by SPF 50, right? And so that's why I think SPF 50 is often used as a really good surrogate for when you're out looking to buy sunscreen, that you want at least that much protection. But part of the reason you kind of want to overestimate the amount is just naturally when we put on sunscreen, it's very similar to what we were talking about with makeup, is when they test it in the lab to get that SPF, they put on like a really, really thick layer. And that's just not how people apply it. So the studies have shown that when people apply sunscreen, they typically apply about 25% to maybe 50%, so a quarter to a half of what is actually necessary to get the SPF listed on the bottle. And so I think it's when you're making these buying decisions, it's also kind of knowing like, how do you personally apply sunscreen, right? If you're someone who likes to apply a thinner layer, then going for a really high SPF may be a better strategy for you. If you're someone that applies it, reapplies it in a pretty thick layer, then SPFs 15, 30, 50 are totally fine.
Yeah, I was reading that that's what the general consensus is, like 30 or 50 are generally good. And then once you start getting into 70 and 100, it's kind of just a little bit of a marketing play, right? Because it's like you think, oh, 100 must be double the 50, right? You must get double the sun protection, but it's not actually the case.
Exactly. By the time you're in like the 30s and 50s, you're blocking out over 97% of the light coming to your skin. So if you want that extra, 3% covered by getting another extra 50 in your SPF, great. But in terms of making a real difference, if you're applying it correctly, there really isn't one.
And so in terms of like, if you have already naturally darker skin, like you mentioned, you have olive skin or you have darker skin or black skin, do you still need sunscreen?
Yes. So I'm a big believer that sun protection is something that's for everyone. So when you think of it from a skin cancer perspective, while rates of skin cancer are less in darker toned individuals, they still happen. But also, if you really want to get that kind of skin health and anti-aging benefit, it's still affecting you, even if you have that darker skin. So what you have when you have darker skin is you have something called melanin, which is a pigment that really helps to kind of provide some almost like natural SPF on board. But it's still really not protecting you completely against the aging effects of the sun and then other skin sort of health related effects. So yes, you still need to wear sunscreen, unfortunately, when you're a darker skin type.
And what about when I'm sure people ask you about vitamin D, which is the vitamin we get from our skin being exposed to the sun. So are we still able to make adequate amounts of vitamin D while we're totally protecting ourselves?
This is an area that's a really hot area of sort of debate in the medical community between the vitamin D community and the dermatology community. And they face off over this topic all the time. It's still an area that's not really yet completely resolved. This is part of the reason actually for our product Sundots, why we chose to formulate it with vitamin D in 100% of the daily value, and also used a vegan-based source, because there is this trade-off between getting sun and having adequate vitamin D levels if you're not using some kind of supplement. And when you really look at the data on sort of the whole population level, especially here in North America, we're pretty D deficient. There is a very significant portion of the population that has what you would call vitamin D deficiency, which is something that's really important for our bone health and for the health of our immune systems. And so there is this trade-off of like, how much sun do you get versus how much sort of aging risk. The way that we've kind of mitigated that is saying, make sure that you have vitamin D supplementation on board. Even with kind of the best practices out there, you probably still will be getting some sun to your skin and making vitamin D. That's actually a really exciting thing about the different ingestible approaches to sun protection. Is exactly kind of what we had talked about earlier, the difference between preventing light from getting to your skin, which is kind of the sunscreen, clothing, hat paradigm, or the helping to boost your skin's natural defenses from inside. Because in that approach, you're actually still getting the sunlight to your skin, and that doesn't interfere with the vitamin D production. So it's kind of a very long way of saying the jury's still out. We recommend that people have a vitamin D supplement on board, because even if you are getting sun in the northern hemisphere here in the winter, you're not going to be getting enough. And also that there are, different trade-offs between the different sun protection strategies. And that is one benefit of the ingestible products, is it doesn't interfere with vitamin D production.
Yeah, and I love that it's just so easy. It's all in like one little thing that you can just take in the morning and feel comfortable knowing that you have some sun protection on, like even in the winter, because I got to be honest, I don't know if I'm going to slather sunscreen on in the winter on my hands, because there's nothing really exposed in the winter in New York. But
totally. I mean, I come from the dermatology community, and I don't wear sunscreen every day. I mean, I'm just realistic in that I try my best, but especially in the winter months, that habit slips a little bit.
Yeah. It was interesting. So one of the articles, she had written an article on medium.com, and you had a photo of a man, a truck driver, who's a truck driver for, I guess, decades. And one side of his face was severely aged, like sagging wrinkles, and the other side of his face, looked like normal for his age. And it was because he was getting all that sunlight from the window when he was driving.
Totally, yes. I love that picture. It's from an old New England Journal of Medicine article. It really kind of drives that point home, because I think something a lot of people think about is like, oh, if I'm in my office or if I'm in my car, I can't get a sunburn, which is true that glass is really good at blocking out one type of UV light called UVB light. And that's the type of light that's really responsible predominantly for skin cancer development, and it plays kind of a minor role in aging. There's another type of UV light called UVA light, and that type of light is really strong in the skin aging arena with a lesser role in skin cancer. And that UVA light can go through glass, right? And so while you might not be getting a burn when you're in the car driving or sitting in your office and feeling the nice warm sun on you, you're still getting that aging light. So sun protection, again, from that aging perspective, is still really, really important, even in those kinds of indoor or pseudo-indoor settings.
Yeah, so maybe I'm taking my words back. I'm definitely putting it on my face. So actually, that brings up a question. When you get a melanoma, would that only happen in a place that's actually exposed to the sun, like maybe a place that you got a burn, or could that happen then anywhere?
So there's two different types of, there's many different types of skin cancers, but there's two broad categories. One are melanoma skin cancers. The other one are non-melanoma skin cancers. So the melanoma skin cancers, they can kind of pop up anywhere. They are, probably more common in areas that are sun exposed, but they really can happen anywhere on the body. And so this is why when you recommend going to see a dermatologist, they give you a full body skin exam, because many of the places that melanomas pop up are not places that are traditionally exposed to the sun. More commonly they are, but they can really kind of pop up anywhere, especially as we were talking about importance of sun protection in people that have darker skin types. Very often their melanomas can pop up in places that never see the sun, like on the bottom of the feet.
Bob Marley, he died of a melanoma under his toe.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's why it's also so important to, really message that just because you have olive skin, darker skin, doesn't mean you're immune from kind of this melanoma risk. Because even when you look at sort of the data behind melanomas, in darker skin types, they tend to be even more aggressive than in lighter skin types. The other sort of branch of skin cancers are the non-melanoma skin cancers. Those are much, much more common in areas that are exposed to the sun. So you see those a lot on the face, on the hands, on the arms, sometimes the lower leg. And those tend to happen a little bit later than life. So melanoma can really happen anytime in life and does affect young people at really an alarming rate. Whereas the non-melanoma skin cancers that are in sort of these sun-exposed areas, those are kind of having the lifetimes or many years of sun damage on board that really lead to these types of skin cancers. So you tend to see them at a little bit of a later age, not super old, but just later than you would screen for melanoma.
And so let's say that you grew up with a bunch of sun damage, right? Like me at the beach with my blistering sunburn. Are there any ways to repair it? Because I know I've heard, right, that a lot of your sun damage occurs in your childhood and that affects your risk for melanoma down the line. So let's just say that we've had sun damage, we've been bad and we didn't protect ourselves or have sun dots or sunscreen. Is there any way we can repair that?
So the answer is kind of all of the above in this case. So yes, when you have a lot of sun damage, as a kid, you got a bunch of blistering sunburns, that really does boost your risk down the line of developing skin cancer, developing premature skin aging, things like that. But it doesn't mean because you had sun damage as a kid that you give up on sun protection as an adult, right? I've heard that many people, it's already too late for me, right? I had all the sunburns as a kid, therefore I
might as well get a tan.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's that sun exposure that you continue to get and get every day that adds up over sort of the course of your life. So yes, you might have an uptick in your risk from sun exposure you got as a kid, but as you kind of go through life, which is like the bulk of your life, hopefully that one lives, it's really important to keep protecting yourself against the sun so you don't keep adding to that risk, right? And that's where like the bulk of your risk can eventually come from, especially when talking about those non-melanoma skin cancers. In terms of sort of repairing damage, it's really difficult to tell. I haven't seen any great studies on like, can you reverse damage? Because a lot of what exactly as I was talking about is confounded by ongoing damage, right? If you keep getting sun exposure as an adult, how do you tell what's old damage versus new damage and kind of separating those things out? So the most important thing you can do is continue to protect yourself against the sun and also lead like a healthy lifestyle. So talking about exercising, talking about staying hydrated, and then also making sure that you're eating a sort of a well-balanced, healthy diet. Because a lot of these sort of antioxidant compounds that we've seen that help protect you against the sun, like our fern extract, but there's been studies with so many others. Green tea is one that people hear about all the time, about all the different health effects that it can have in helping to prevent and repair damage in your body. So I wish I had a better answer other than keep protecting yourself against the sun and lead a healthy lifestyle and eat well. But as many happens with many things in medicine, that tends to be the recommendation.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to pray that works for me. So I'm eating all the greens, all the veggies, and
you're doing everything right.
So one question that I love to ask everyone on this show is if there's just one tip or piece of advice that you could leave our listeners with to live a happier and healthier life, what would that be?
I think it really comes down to a lot of the ethos that kind of inspired us to create Sundots, which is really this idea of like, do your best and don't feel bad about the things that you couldn't do. Because we understand that in leading a healthy life and leading a happy life, there's so many things that you want to do or know you should be doing. And as long as you kind of know that you try your best at doing those things, like don't feel guilty about not being able to hit sort of the stretch goal all of the time. And so I think our little sun protection problem is a good one that is how, we look at everything in life. It's like, yes, in an ideal world, would you put on sunscreen every day and wear a hat and take your sun dots and be super cognizant? Of course. But like, we also understand life is challenging and there's so many things that we have to be doing. And so as long as you make the effort and try your hardest to do it, then don't feel guilty about the days where, you're less than perfect, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. The guilt is the worst thing. That's what really creates the problem, whereas the bad part, the not hitting the goal is not the bad part. It's the guilt afterwards.
Totally. Yeah. So let go of that guilt and just try your best, I think is a good recipe for that.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I enjoyed all this information. You've definitely inspired me to be even more careful in the sun. That is for sure. Good. I'm going to go get one of those visors that everyone's wearing in LA now.
Get the LA visor going in New York.
Yes. So if you guys want to check out Sundots or read more about how it works and sun protection in general, you guys can head to sundots.com. And Emilia and her team were so nice to offer you guys 20% off. So you can use the code REALFOOD20 to get 20% off your order of Sundots. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Maria, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in this week. If you enjoyed and got value from this episode, I'd be so grateful if you can take just 1 minute to leave an honest review on iTunes, as that will help us reach more people and get incredible guests on the show. To say thank you, email a screenshot of your review to info@mariamarlowe.com and we'll send you a free 3-day healthy eating sugar detox meal plan. After each and every episode, I encourage you to come say hi on Instagram @Maria Marlowe, that's MariaMarlowe, or in the private Happier and Healthier podcast group on Facebook. In both of these places, we can continue the conversation about today's episode, so come and share what you think. If you want more, you can also head to mariamarlowe.com, where you'll find tons of healthy recipes, meal plans, and resources to help you live your healthiest and happiest life. Lastly, if there's someone you know who'd enjoy this podcast, make their day, and mine, and send it to them now. Until next time, don't forget, health and happiness are a choice. Our thoughts become our reality, so make sure you're thinking up a masterpiece.